This is really great to be here. I was excited when Peg and Mary invited me to come. Before we get started, I'd like just a quick show of hands in terms of how many folks here have experience with individuals with autism. How many of you are parents? How many of you are educators? Professional educators. Okay. And a grandparent. And that provides lots of experience. Okay, and so everyone here, though, has some level of personal relationship with individuals with autism, would be fair to say. Okay, great. And so the focus of our conversation really is more on the how-to and the what of catechesis and participation in the sacraments and parish life. That's kind of what I'm prepared for, and I do refer to some of the specific spectrum of autism. And the other thing to know that, and one of the things I think is a gift of autism, which is not why I think autism exists, there's a difference, but one of the gifts is a reminder that every person is unique. And our job as catechists is really to focus on the person that we're walking with and sharing our faith with, whether it's a whole group of kids, teens, adults, or it's one individual. But everyone has unique needs. So I'm going to share, we'll talk a little bit about the organization of the task and what essence to focus on relative to topics, but then, and strategies and examples of adapted resources that I've done and how to adapt. But understand that I'm giving you principles, that hopefully what you'll take from this is principles to apply. You're welcome to use anything that I have here. Any of the stuff that I have here that I've created, I'm happy to share with you, to use in your parishes. So I just wanted to know, because that's one of the operating principles is when in education with our friends with autism is meeting the learner based on his or her needs and what the goals are. And so there's a lot of adaptation that happens. And as I said, everyone who signed in the sign-up list that's going around, I will send, and I will respond to you with an email that includes a link for resources. The other thing I want to say before I get started too, and also explain Andrea's particularity on her language. Because in the first workshop, she introduced his pastoral ministry for persons with disabilities. And I explained that I walk with people, I don't fix anyone, I don't do things for people. And actually it's interesting in Christmas cards that I get from other departments in the Archdiocese, I'll get it to the director for ministry for the disabled ministry. And I'm always kind of wondering, the disabled ministry, which I'm not sure. So, pastoral, it's a tongue twister, it's a mouthful, but every word's important. The other thing is hopefully to give you hope. For any of you that don't have professional educational background, I have a bachelor's in social work. I started as a math ed major. I have a master's in theology that came after I worked in the semiconductor industry. My son, I have one child, he is 21 now, a junior in college, was diagnosed with ADHD at 4.5. So while I have been diving into the learning process with him, I haven't been living with autism. I'm new to the autism world than 7 years ago. But I was blessed with 3 amazing mothers. One's a theologian, one's a psychologist, one's a community marketing extraordinaire, and also some professional educators, one of which is now the executive director for Autism New Jersey, who have just shared so much with me and mentored me and continue to mentor and walk with. And so how to adapt materials, how to train catechists, so anyway. So any of you that don't have the professional training, know that that's okay. It's just a willingness and ability to learn. But before we go any further, what I would like you to stop and think about is who was the catechist that had the most impact on your life? Who comes to mind? And why? I have a couple of volunteers to share. Yes?
My mother.
Uh-huh. And why?
Almost self-explanatory, but definitely because she took her role as being my primary catechist very seriously, and she was greatly interested in passing along her own deep love for faith to
Okay, cool. So just, she not only professed it, God bless you, but she definitely lived it, and you felt it in her love for you. And her life, obviously. Any other people? Yes, Nancy?
I don't remember her name, I'm sorry to say, but she was a young sister that came to the little country church that I was a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And Father had these two young sisters that came out to teach catechism
Mm-hmm.
at that point. And I mean, I still can remember things that happened in that class. In that class, we were sitting in church pews. It was not.
What do you remember?
We did things. Like, they never just said things to us.
It was engaging.
It was entirely engaging. They would, when they were talking about ordination of priesthood, they would talk about how their fingers would be tied together, during part of the ceremony to represent the sacredness of those fingers that were
Mm-hmm.
holding the Eucharist. And I remember how they tied all the fingers on us. Everyone in the class had our fingers tied like that so we could experience it. Things like that.
And relationship, I would assume?
Yes.
And,
Definitely relationship.
I mean, for me, he's now Bishop Dewar. At the time, it was Father Dewar, and he was brand new out of seminary, and I was in 7th grade when he first came to our parish, and in 8th grade when I said, "What do you mean I can't wear jeans to church? God loves me just like I am, right?" And he said, "Oh, yes, Ann, God loves you just as you are, jeans, no jeans, whatever, but the grandmother sitting next to you will have a heart attack." And at that time, I'm 54. At that time, yes, jeans were not appropriate for Mass, and it would have been scandalous for our elder. So it was my first lesson that the church is more than just me and God. It's about all of us as the body of Christ. And he also continued to listen to my questions when I was in college and in my wandering years, and presided at my wedding and could gently chide me in reconciliation when my mother had come in just before. But because relationship, he always cared to listen. And I think the reason I ask you who it was is because that's why you're here today. I mean, I think whoever it was that had an impact on your faith development is why you're choosing to be a catechist and to come forward. So, and in terms of sharing your faith with our friends with autism, basically, what's the purpose? What are the essential points? What is the individual's particular needs? What are the strategies? And the where and the when to make it, what are the environmental needs? That's how, no matter who it is that you're going to be a catechist with, those are the basic questions. They don't change. So what is the primary purpose of catechesis? Nancy, you're not allowed to answer. I promise it doesn't have to be the Baltimore Catechism quote. But what is the primary purpose of catechesis?
Bringing Christ to people who want to know Christ or have an interest, who you feel that who you see have a desire but are not sure how they can meet Christ or encounter
Bringing
Christ.
people to Christ, bringing people to meet Christ. Okay, that's really good. Any other thoughts?
Pass on the faith.
Pass on the faith. Any other? The primary purpose is catechesis is communion with Jesus. So you were there. And a lot of times I don't get anything close to that when I ask that question. And the reason it's important to remember is I think that offers a lot of relief. We have an extremely rich, broad tradition that appeals to very different spiritualities. I mean, at times we're a motley crew, aren't we, when Catholics get together? And that's part of our richness and our beauty, but the essence is communion with Jesus. And how do we foster that? Relationship. That's the basis of all we do as catechists. We engage in relationship, we come together, so relax and not stress so much about the what as opposed to relationship. And the what isn't so, and the other thing is focus on presented needs. Oftentimes parents will first contact us and we're thinking they're looking for total full inclusion over the next 10 years, which And First Eucharist next month. And we're like sweating bullets. You know, their desires might be very simple. It might be that I want my son to celebrate First Eucharist. Their expectations could be quite low, in fact. I mean, one of my goals is I actually try work to raise parents' expectations, at the same time acknowledging that it takes us time to get there. So, confidentiality and trust is important because we're not always perceived as professional educators. We're pastoral folks. So let them know that they can share the information with us, and we do trust what they share with us, and also who they want to know the information. But in terms of what's essential, and so particularly, you know, and I forgot to ask this question in the beginning, the folks that you're all thinking of in coming here today, where on the spectrum, just kind of call it out, where on the spectrum, you know, in terms of, or raise a hand, who does not have expressive language? So we've got some folks without expressive language. And in terms of who would be considered with Asperger's on the higher end of quote unquote? Any considered on the quote unquote lower end of the spectrum? And I hate using those language, but people understand it. Okay. And so, I mean, this list came together with, in particular, thinking of children in particular, but it really is anyone, whatever age we engage in, that are preparing for First Eucharist, because that's typically, right, when Catholic parents come forward anyway, whatever their kids are like in terms of abilities and disabilities, is preparing for First Eucharist. Those that hardly come to Mass, it's usually second grade when they call about it. But so what is it, given that that's the starting point, you know, what is it? And so God's activity in our world, nurture a relationship with Jesus. Jesus is the visible presence of the invisible God. Church, a sense of church as family. Sacraments, particularly baptism, Eucharist, reconciliation, and confirmation. And I'm thinking in the beginning while we're preparing for First Eucharist, prayer, ways of praying, sense of prayer, and the Mass. If a family is not able to attend Mass together because either they've been asked to leave by an usher, which has happened, because there are one of the things with autism is there'll be behaviors that are associated with it. So if they're not, either they've been asked to leave, they're afraid they're going to be asked to leave, or they don't want to disturb other people. That's the starting point, because that's really the essence of what we're doing. And to celebrate, you know, there's a family that I've worked with where they had a program for preparing for First Eucharist for kids with autism. Celebrated First Communion, great. Next Sunday, behavior was a bit off task and got asked to leave by one of the ushers. So we really need to, fortunately, I mean, he has now learned to attend Mass, but that's really my suggestion of starting there if they're not able to, is being able to attend Mass as a family. And we'll actually hear from Mary Beth Walsh sharing, that was her starting point. If they're not able to attend Mass, or even to participate in a program to teach attending Mass, why wouldn't that be? In teaching to attend Mass, there's a program that has been identified and developed by some of the behaviorists I work with. It really taps into a systematic way of teaching it, tapping into the child's motivation system. They need to be able to work on a motivation system, and we'll talk about that later a bit. But if they can't, so how do we get started? We're not saying then forget it, it's not going to happen. No, there are things we can do in the beginning. Sharing stories about Jesus, the family sharing and experiencing the faith together. This Is My Church is a template you can download from my website. It's a PowerPoint template that has basically pictures of a place where you can insert pictures of your church. And it's got like 1 or 2 lines of catechesis about each location in the church, the altar. It helps to prepare the person for being comfortable in the space of your church. It can also be used along the way going into the church, and then, like, for example, so beyond the book, you could also cut out the pictures as cards to go to the places. And so it becomes a way of familiarizing and developing comfort with the space. And becoming familiar and working on a motivational system. And that's something that is incorporated into many school programs, not all, but So it's there. But anyway, with baptism, areas of focus, we are all children of God. Holy Spirit is an effective baptism. Water is one of the easy things, I think, to help kind of develop a sense of symbol, because it is such a basic thing that's a part of our life. Our friends with autism often are more concrete in their thinking, and symbol and metaphor is more challenging for many, not all. But so ways to associate. And so how you might do that is, this is, pass this around. This has got, it's a bingo card for use of water. And I'm sorry, I passed it around last time and I can't find it now. Focusing on the cleansing, nourishing, purifying. So ways that people you can set up, like do little bingo cards and also cut out and cut and paste. So ways of getting, you can also experience water. So that, that's helpful to get going with it. Then, and here's another way, the dotted lines. I mean, I try to visually, I love, have anyone heard Temple Grandin's book or read it, Thinking in Pictures? That's, so using pictures as much as you can. Reconciliation, the focus in that is on, sin is such a loaded word. I like the term unloving choices. We already know my language is a mouthful. But Thomas Groom, actually, he's a well-respected religious educator out of Boston College. He's actually where I learned the term unloving choices from. Because really the focus is relationship. When we make unloving choices, we hurt our relationship with God and with each other. There is an adapted prayer of sorrow. Oh, you know what? Here, I found my baptism materials. I'll pass around. Here, if you wouldn't mind passing that. And there's an adapted prayer of sorrow that I will pass around as soon as we locate that, as well as the Our Father. But it simplifies, and it uses board maker pictures also for helping to... My clicker was clicking when I wasn't looking. So focusing on relationship. Is the person aware when he or she does wrong? Typically the practice, and I don't know what it is in Washington, in Newark the guidelines say to celebrate reconciliation prior to Eucharist, first Eucharist. However, there is also, when that doesn't make sense, a child with autism could be ready for first Eucharist but not be ready for reconciliation. There is a path for a pastoral response to that. And so just working with your diocese and also your pastor on doing that. And there are different ways that it could happen too. It would be possible for, maybe the parent just wants them to participate in the communal reconciliation liturgy, or go into individual reconciliation, but to have the visual cues, the visual schedule, the prayers in place. They can use the iPad, I mean, anything, any communication, the way he or she communicates. You would just need to prepare him or her for the process, as well as to know the priest prior. That would be really important. Eucharist, presence of Jesus in the host, and that's different from ordinary food. That is the basic. That's actually the basic requirement for all people celebrating First Eucharist. Our programs reflect sharing the depth and richness of our tradition, as well as connecting with life. And so we want to do that with our friends with autism too. We should never assume that we'll just teach them Jesus in the host. No, because they're capable, as we'll see, of much more than we used to think. Nurturing a relationship with Jesus, connecting with peers in the worship community, special events. If you have a retreat for First Eucharist, which most parishes do, they may not be able to attend to the whole schedule, but parts of it, and with supports, matching them up with some peers, and So talk with the family, work that out, get inputs for and also preparing for the process of receiving and the ability to attend Mass. We're going to see this actually played out, so I'm not going to spend it, but this is here, Ben is being taught to identify Jesus, that Jesus is present in the host. Confirmation, gifts of the Holy Spirit, sharing our gifts with the church, and connections with the peers and parish. Interestingly enough, in the guidelines for celebrating the sacraments for people with disabilities, the bishops actually say, and I want to repeat this, I want to read it. Persons who, because of developmental or mental disabilities, may never attain the use of reason are to be encouraged, either directly or, if necessary, through their parents or guardian, to receive the sacrament of confirmation at the appropriate time. So the focus is really on as inclusive as possible, even with Eucharist. I mean, they don't have to be able to say that they understand you. It's more a demonstration, even by reverence, to be able to recognize that this is special. Jesus is here. However they understand it and can communicate it, that they can show reverence and awe. Begin with the person before you, and person first. I'm 54, postmenopausal, have a lot of arthritis in my body. I don't want to be referred to as an arthritic woman with, postmenopausal. I mean, I'm more than that, even though it impacts a big part of my life, and some days more than others. But yes, the women in the room are chuckling. The men are like, oh my gosh, what did I get into? It's just like, and we do have some of our friends with autism that are able to speak quite well for themselves, define themselves as autistic, and say, yes, I'm actually defined by my autism. And so, yeah, I mean, the experience of the conditions of our mind and body do impact us greatly, but we're all more than that. And so just remember that. And to ask about gifts, likes, and as well as dislikes, there's like 18 questions in a conversation with parents that's in the resource that I'll email to you guys that goes over that. Parents and teachers are a great source of input. You just ask them the questions and they're happy to share. Also talk with the teachers. Many teachers are happy to talk with you. Some of them may even be able to be enlisted to help. But at least to be able to talk with you to give insight. But don't expect the parents to be the solution. Some of them will, but some need their own feeding and nurturing. Most of them. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And they all do need that, but some still want to be a part of the solution. And we're grateful for those that do. But then the other, if you're able to, if you're not a professional educator, observing the child in their school setting is really illuminating and helpful. Faith at home is some tips, for families sharing the faith with their children. And I don't want to... participation is the beginning of belonging. And the reason I want to point this out it's not just one strategy. I mean, working with our friends with autism, it's very much like being Catholic, both and. Lots of things. But applied behavior analysis, who here is familiar with that process? Some of you. Applied behavior analysis is basically, it's a very systematic way of identifying behavior that is desired and how to implement it. And don't get sweated up about the details, but just because there are some simple principles that we can take from it. And it's very helpful. Some people are uncomfortable with it because it focuses on behavior. But the thing is that when we're together, being together, you experience me as part of the community, and I experience being part of it. If I'm a person, so there's just, if I have to wait to be able to participate, to be present with you, it's going to be that much longer before I feel a part of you and you feel me a part of you. Does that make sense? So, and it doesn't just focus, it's focusing on what's observable because that works, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, that's why we also nurture a relationship with Jesus. We talk, pictures, words, lots of ways of communicating, but it's a great place to start because if behavior is out of line, it's going to be really hard to be together, right? This is adapted from models of education. So there are different ways. When a family comes to you, they could either be fully included. I mean, my goal is as inclusive as possible, but that can vary based on what the parents the family and the individual wants or feels comfortable with. I have a mom who first told me, but the autism world is so safe. I don't want inclusive. You know, to like some mixture of that, to some separate programming, but even when you have separate programming, there's still connections with typically developing peers and the worship community. We are one church. And so and also know that just because today my parish isn't able to be supportive of really fully inclusive in catechesis, we can work on that. And that's part of what we're talking about here today, but also tapping into the gifts in your community.
Well, I was just saying that being part of the Mass, I mean, when the child reaches that point, then they're really fully included in what really matters, I think.
If they're there.
Yeah.
Because we have many families, and like I talked about inclusive, actually I mentioned inclusive family masses, I didn't discuss it. There are many families that aren't coming because they're afraid of the behaviors being disruptive or of being asked to leave, or they've already experienced that.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing too is it's not, Mass is central, but that's not the only experience of being Catholic. There's catechesis, there's also the coffee and donuts, there's the, you know, whatever. There's the food pantry, I mean, all of it. So how can we, so maximizing that in the ways that work. And so it's getting to know the person, again, relationship, what are the needs, assessing skills. You know, if he or she can only sit for 5 minutes at a time, well, you're not going to start on attending Mass. You may be able to be doing something in catechesis, but it might not be attending Mass yet. We're going to talk about reinforces in a few minutes, so I want to, and also educating the parish. For example, if you've got a family or a child that's learning to attend Mass, they come in the last 15 minutes and then they're gradually being there longer, and also at the same time, or even if they're coming in from the beginning of Mass, and there are behaviors and noises that are happening in Mass that the parish isn't usually used to, you want to educate the parish that, you know what, we've got some children in our parish that need additional support on learning how to attend Mass, and we're just really grateful their parents care that much, and we're going to support it. And thank you for your support. I'm not going to focus on the autism data, but I would like you to respond. What strikes you in this picture?
Did a child draw it?
Sorry?
Did a child draw it?
What strikes you in this picture? Answer my question. Yes?
The child loves the dog.
The child loves the dog?
Child, yeah.
Affection?
His pants are weird.
Sorry?
Somehow it's like an action, but the emotion,
Action and emotion.
yes, not.
This is a charcoal drawing by a young man with autism, Justin Khanna. In fact, that's his website, justinart.com. Justin, as a young child, had no expressive language. His parents struggled with speaking, signing, drawing. Finally, at 4, there was an epiphany moment when Dad drew like a cartoon script showing Justin that if he stood close to the swing when there was someone on the swing, he would get hurt. And it took off from there. Justin is now fluent in the language of picture. He does speak, but the thing that blows me away is it's oozing with relationship. Yet, Justin does not have great social skills. I mean, he's a lot better today than he was. He's like 21 now. He's had a lot of, you know, therapy to support that and education, so he gets better and better, but, you know, he's still not expansive in his speech. His goal is to be a famous, successful artist, and he's actually doing pretty well. But anyway, this in particular, and also my early meetings with Ben that we're going to see in a moment, is it was the first like eye-opening experience for me that, you know, the stereotypes about autism, that they're introspective, disconnected, don't care about the world around them, is like baloney. And there's so much more. We just need to slow down. You know, if I ask Justin how he's doing today, he's thinking about, well, right now I don't feel so hot. I'm here, I want to be someplace else. This morning I felt great after my bacon and eggs. I mean, he's going through all this in his mind, right? And I'm mentally in my car already, right? So we have to slow down and take things slower. And I think what's next now, we're going to be actually, in this video, we'll actually see some catechesis and hear from some parents too.
I found out that my son couldn't go to Catholic school, and we were devastated by that, because our older son goes to Catholic school. I cannot pray. This stinks. I'm dry. I'm angry. I'm bitter. I can't pray. He said, right now, with what we're going through, Sheree, your life is a prayer.
No. Get the church curriculum. Go on, get communion stuff. Ben. Go on.
That's a pointing prompt.
Juice? You ready, Ben? Point to Jesus. Great job, Ben. Ben, point to bread. Excellent, Ben. Point to Jesus. Good job, Ben. Ben, match Jesus. Match Jesus. Great job, Ben.
He verbally praised correct answers. He only maneuvered incorrect answers. He didn't verbalize on incorrect ones. Now he's pointing, prompting for a correct response.
What is this? What is this? Good job. What is this? Excellent, Ben.
Canon law says that the only requirement for First Communion is to be able to discriminate between the Eucharistic host and to know that that's different from regular food, from regular bread. So we were able to teach Ben that discrimination.
Unfortunately, Ben's a very social kid. Like, people who watch him like see what he can do. So it was more rewarding for him to do it right, to be able to walk up there by himself, and make sure no one was watching, and make sure his peers are watching, and make sure that everyone knew that he was part of this too. And we continued to have to do by himself. I think it's important to push him to be at his best and not at his comfort zone.
You know, Shannon worked really hard actually to teach Ben to be able to do all the different pieces that the other kids did all by himself. So at one point during the mass, I had to walk all the way to the back to where the baptismal font is and walk back up front. And the religious educators in my parish said he doesn't have to do that by himself. He can have shadow with him, or you could do it or anything. But the shadow really worked to teach him to be able to do that on his own. And when he did it on his own, on the day of his first communion, he was first of all very proud of himself. And it also allowed everybody in the church to see how much he was capable of. So the skills that she taught him allowed him to really shine. And I think changed, I'm sure, a lot of his minds about what kids with autism really are capable of doing. It gave him a lot of dignity in front of his parish.
Can I ask you a question, buddy?
Yes.
Does God love you? Do you love God?
Sit up, baby. Do you love God? Sit up. Sit up. Is she very tired? There you go. Are you shy?
Did you receive your Holy Communion lately, or did LJ? Did you receive Jesus? Did you get Jesus? No?
Do you want to?
Yes. What are you going to say when the priest says, body of Christ? Yeah, again in a few minutes. What are you gonna say? Okay, look at me. I know you want your computer, but look at me, I wanna ask you one question.
Okay, yes, wait one second. This is the moment.
Look at me. What are you gonna say when the priest says, "Body of Christ"? Can you say the Hail Mary for our friend, please?
The world's fastest Hail Mary. That was a good job, though. It can test you. It can stretch you out. It can make you feel like you don't have any more energy or any more resources. It feels like it depletes you, can deplete you. But then it can also take a person who's used to living a life like this and broaden their perspective quite a bit. And it can teach you not only about children who are on the spectrum, but it can also teach you about yourself.
I think, this is LJ. I think autism can challenge you. I think it can torture you. I think it can, like what Mark was saying, just so I echo the same thing instead. I think it can build a life of faith rather than a practice of faith.
Autism can't and shouldn't stop you from participating in your faith community. There are always ways to include people with autism in faith communities. Not every faith community is going to know them. You may have to do the education work yourself.
It can't define you.
And it can't control you. It can't let it control you. And
It can't.
It can't make you stop being who you are.
good answer, yes.
If I firmly want him to understand when he goes through those sacraments what they mean, and if it takes longer, it'll take longer. And if we need to adapt curriculum, we'll adapt curriculum. Being able to say in that environment, I'm mad at God, and I'm not happy with this, or my faith is shaking right now, and I'm not happy, and I'm not going to pray for a couple of weeks and see what happens. And so all of that freedom is really well worked.
There are a few Jewish clergy in this part as well.
And then there's no sense of peculiarity about your child being in the synagogue pews. And so if there is that outburst, it's not going to be uncomfortable to those sitting around who don't know within the congregation.
I learned really from all of my students, and that I love teaching. But learning with Sarah is wonderful for me because it's brand new learning for me, and I have to approach everything that I do afresh, and it challenges me in a really wonderful way.
Make your directions clear. Don't just assume that because you have a group of kids at a certain grade level that they're going to understand everything you say. Sort of treat everybody as though they're not going to get it. Break it down, say it clear, belabor the same point over and over again, and then you can sort of meet the needs of all the kids in one class. So you don't have to have anybody stand out.
The curriculum been for first communion. I started about 3 years before.
3 years before, she said.
Every Sunday, teaching him over CATECHESIS still, having him walk up with his brother and be on our seat, teaching him to stand at the appropriate times, and to kneel at the appropriate times, to shake other people's hands, when you find things immediately to take into the liturgy, with the envelope with the collection basket, and swaying to the music, so there were things being built that were enjoyable
So, I mean, in there we heard the stories, sagas, and their journey, as well as some points that we're going to be reinforcing here. But one of the things, especially we're talking about a spectrum, right? Autism is a spectrum. There are lots of different abilities and ranges of abilities and understandings. But whether it's autism or what disability, just focus on communication and behavior. If you focus on how they communicate, how they understand, what's helpful, what's not helpful, and also what is helpful for behavior management and supports, that's going to get you far. And that's going to help you nurture a relationship, which is really, again, what the whole thing is about. And remember, in communication is an active process. So it requires engagement. Notice Cherie with Dominic. He wanted to get to the computer. He was really not interested in that conversation. But she got his attention. You know, what do you say when the priest says? She got his attention, he responded, and then we got the world's fastest Hail Mary because, you know, then he knew he was off to the computer. But still, so, you know, you just have to, recognize what's the motivation and what's behind it. And also, communication, there are two forms, expressive and receptive. Receptive is what I understand you to say. Expressive is how I communicate with you. It would be, do I speak it? Do I sign? Do I use pictures? Do I have to write it? Do I use what's called an augmented communication device, which would be some type of digital record machine? So what is that? And how to engage in effort. The other thing to remember is it requires effort. No matter who you're working with and their abilities. I saw this great, it was a thermal imaging of a teacher and an elementary grade student. And oddly enough, the image in the child's brain was the one that was really lit up. And you know, you would say, oh, but I mean, most of us in the room thought, well, he's just sitting there listening, right? No, he's trying to, I mean, so his brain was, the teacher had to work much less to communicate the information that she was very comfortable with, as opposed to the child, the student, had to work really hard. And I think that would be something good for us to remember in any of our catechetical settings. Also, behavior communicates. Why am I acting like this? There could be a medical, I mean, if you're not able to assume any of the others, is there a medical reason that could be, you know, someone is sick or they've got something. But anyway, escape or avoidance. If it's escape, you know, Dominic wanted to escape. He wanted to go to the computer. It could be avoidance with, I'm afraid I don't know the Hail Mary. So I just want to get out of here. So I'm going to cause a problem before I know it's time to say the Hail Mary. Attention. Do you have the, if our kids don't have our attention, then they're going to probably get it. I mean, my son, you know, in first grade, when his teacher decided he answered too many questions at the front of the class, she put him in the back of the class. And you will hear my son. So if she wasn't going to call on him, he became a class clown. Yeah, so are they looking for our attention? Is that, you know, was that the root of the behavior? Tangibles, do they want access to something else? And that's what's prompting the behavior. And sensory stimulation, hand flapping, for example, which could point to anxiety about something or just something. So it's knowing the person and knowing what the behavior causes are and how to deal with it. We kind of talked about this already. And then again, and this was addressed in the video, state things simply in the affirmative. Do not provide alternatives when no alternatives are accepted. For example, we often say, would you please pass that to me? Well, no is not acceptable. So just say, please pass that to me. Or please get into line. Ask once and follow through. Say things once. If we allow the person time to process what we've asked or said, sometimes when we repeat ourselves, we're basically, every time we repeat ourselves, we're restarting them processing the information, and that makes it confusing for them. Stress the positive, catch them being good. We saw with Ben, he would, you know, verbally praise, and if he needed guidance or correction, then it was a physical prompting that he did it with, and to focus on the strengths. Here's a behavior contract, both visual, both pictures, as well as textual, depending on the abilities of the person. Provide choice. You know, if I'm uncomfortable, if it's too noisy, I will not flap my hands, so I'm not going to do that. But I have things I can do. I can go for a walk. I can go to a quiet place. I can visit Miss Jessica, read a book, listen to music. It's providing some choice. And also in the discussion and working out to this point, there would be a way, how do I communicate that? Acceptable ways to communicate it. So it provides, and then if I do this, then I will get to play kickball. Structure and consistency. There's a picture of, and we'll show, you know, sometimes creative people like to vary things. Don't do that with our friends with autism. You want a routine. Routine is important. Picture schedules or textual schedules are helpful to know what's coming. Prepare for transitions. If there's going to be a change in the routine, give notice. For example, there's a special celebration going on next week. Let the child, the kid, the person, and the family know. Knowing ahead of time could be enough to prepare for it. For example, there was a man with autism in a congregation that did not like organ music. And this wasn't it wasn't a Catholic parish, but still, it made him very uncomfortable when the organ would play. But he had this thing about numbers. And they actually had a visual flashing for numbers that was actually geared for the child care. So if you have kid 23 and kid 23 needs mom and dad, then they would flash that so that the parents would know to go visit their child in child care. Well, they would flash an 8 to warn this man that music, the organ, was coming on. It's really simple. And it didn't take a lot of work to, but you know, again, so it's coming together as a parish. Picture schedules. Reinforcement. What would you say is the difference between reinforcement and reward? Any thoughts?
Reinforcement is, well, reward is giving or helping them to realize that they've done something good. And reinforcement to me is continuing the positive, to encourage the positive behavior that is being displayed.
It is to encourage the positive behavior displayed, that's right, to increase the likelihood. The difference is, and it's really subtle, but you know I split hairs about language anyway already, right? Reward is more of an extrinsic focus, whereas reinforcing, it's more of an internal tapping into the individual's internal motivation. And the reason it's important is, I'll give you a really good example. In applied behavior analysis, the reinforcer is used, you know, what is motivating to the individual. Going on the computer, Ben was working for juice. It could be a lot of different things. But, you know, it's focused on, it's going to be systematically used, but then also faded out, so that eventually the individual owns the activity, the task, the ability to do something without getting the reinforcer. A reward is something that kind of has to keep happening. And how often, parents do this anyway. You know, it's like our kids are misbehaving, and we'll just say, okay, you know, yeah, keep watching TV, 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes, or, you know, or in church, you know, keep passing them Cheerios so they'll be quiet. Right? So we're reinforcing, unfortunately, the wrong behavior. Because we're just trying to appease them, pacify more. And reinforcing, it's being systematic about it, and it's helping to tap into their own motivation. My son Greg, we used a motivation system when he was younger, that there were certain things, there were like 4 or 5 behaviors within the house from the time he was 5 that were important. You know, setting the table, making his bed, homework, and attitude were the key ones. And you know, so we had the picture schedule on it, and you know, we tried a number of things. Money didn't work. A whole bunch of things that we tried didn't work. Finally, later bedtime worked. And ultimately, at 4th grade, getting rid of the chart was his motivation. He's always been strongly motivated for independence. Ben is motivated still to be with the other kids in his parish. So that was, when he would be in Mass in 2nd grade, and if he was laying across the pew one day, and Mary Beth said, do you want to go to religious ed today? His behavior was on task the whole rest of Mass. Again, it was another defying the stereotypes of autism. Primary reinforcers, food and water. Things that our body depend on are primary ones. Those are going to be the more powerful. And then, others, the secondary ones, or could be generalized, for example, the token board that we saw. And here's an example of the token board as it fills up. This is, you can pass these around. Christopher initially was motivated by the iPod. Eventually, then we changed to playing bongos. It has to be something that's meaningful for the individual, and it will change. And the ones that are the most important or the most powerful are the ones to use for the new skills or the more difficult ones. So you want, like when someone's learning to attend Mass, you want the most powerful ones. We had a boy that we were teaching to attend Mass. He was initially delivered M&Ms continuously. Now, it was with everyone knowing what was going on, and eventually they were gone. I mean, he doesn't get M&Ms in Mass anymore, but he had to learn to be able to attend Mass. So, and being able to generalize, so using a token board is actually being able to know that I've got, like we would fill up 10 times. When you fill up the token board, then it would be the bongos or the iPad. It wouldn't be every time. And let me just say, I'm not a professional behaviorist, okay? So you're sitting there saying, I'm no flipping way going to be handling a token board and doing this, that, or the other thing. No, it would be periodically. I'm not a purist. Periodically, I would be putting on a token when appropriate behavior was happening. And in fact, Christopher used to really like to put them on for me and then to clean it when it was filled up. So initially, when we first started working together, I would probably fill up the token board 4 or 5 times. Well, after 10 months, I would maybe fill it up twice. So it's fading it out. And then eventually, you don't need it. So it's using it to tap into their motivation. Yes?
I'm still not seeing how the reinforcer is different than the reward. I mean, to me, it seems like
It is splitting. It's splitting hairs. I agree, but it's focusing. Just as long as you know that you're focusing on tapping the individual's own ownership of the task and motivation, as opposed to externally rewarding something that will, like you always get a paycheck, right? You get a paycheck all the time. It's not going to get faded away.
I think motivators are rewarding, in a way, the process. Because these things
Yes.
have to be, you have to keep them on task. Like with ABA teaching, they'll sit in the chair for a while, and maybe they'll do, after they get, several little tasks, then maybe they'll get a motivator.
I do admit it sounds like splitting hairs, and so it's not important to belabor, just as long as you know that you're looking on tapping the individual's motivation.
Could we say that it starts from the outside to elicit a response from the inside? I mean, to substitute what you get from the inside, and the satisfaction and whatever that you get.
Our goal is ultimately to feel satisfaction, yes.
Right. So
right.
You kind of phase one out because the other one is starting by itself. Like if you know how to participate and you enjoy the music and you enjoy being part of the Mass,
right.
You don't need anybody to be the focus to be there.
Right. That's a very good explanation. Very good explanation. Task analysis, what's to be done? I'm sorry, I think some of my stuff either walked away or it just got messed up, so I don't know where it is. But so like this is a task analysis showing for making the sign of the cross, the different steps. But then there's also, and it's part of what I'm going to email to you, a text that's guidelines for the teacher, also catechist, on how to teach, making the sign of the cross. And then this is another example, like you could have the pictures then in separate cards that are, if you want to pass around, to place them in order. There are different ways to engage. Shaping is another strategy that's used for example, receiving the host, how to actually hold hands. It could take a while before the individual is able to hold the hands properly and to pick it up and put it in mouth, or making this sharing Christ's peace, to shake hands and actually be looking in someone's eye. Well, it might be, it might be touching the elbow in the beginning. I mean, so it's just kind of shaping. We saw with Ben, there was kind of guidance where he would either he was pointing to something or else actually physically maneuvering his hand. So the different ways of helping to, and then prompting and prompt fading. Again, and actually the pointing, pointing it is a way of prompting. We can either prompt by pointing, by looking at something, by guiding someone, physically walking, kind of just guiding their elbow, or actually saying stand up. So when it says to move in, move out, don't hover, you want to allow the person to, the opportunity, first of all, to respond appropriately. When everyone stands up in the Mass, allow an opportunity for the person to stand up. And if not, then you either say stand up or point to a picture missile, like I've got this picture missile, for example, that, that has the positions. So for each part of it, it's if you're standing or kneeling or sitting, and you can pass this around as well. But it's different ways, and you want to eventually be fading out, not need to prompt. But the prompting is the beginning to help to point it out. What do I do with my prompter? Does that make sense? Backward chaining is where you begin at the end of a task. For example, what works really well teaching someone to attend the Mass is actually starting at the end of Mass. Say the last 5 minutes, depending on the person, and then gradually build up to the beginning. The reason that it works so well is you're always ending with success, on a successful note. So, and the person also knows what's coming next, what's coming forward. Here's a picture schedule that shows the Mass, and you could just use a paper clip to kind of move through it to see the progression of events. But so when teaching someone, when using backward chaining, you would originally want to see how the person handles the situation. So you would observe the child, him or her at Mass with their family one Sunday and maybe 2 or 3 times and see how long they actually lasted. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 25 minutes. Based on that data, then you would decide when to actually bring them into the Mass. And it could be like right before communion, for example. So maybe figure on 10 to 15 minutes, and then gradually working up so that they're there for the full time of the Mass. Otherwise, and I just say, there are some families that are very uncomfortable with the idea, but those families that insist on starting with the beginning of Mass, it takes their children longer to learn to really attend Mass, and the skill doesn't necessarily last as long. We end up having to revisit it, whereas those that learn it from the end and really go through that typically are better prepared. Now, Mary Beth didn't do that for a number of reasons, but Ben was already sitting for an hour when she started bringing him to Mass. So you don't have to just do it one way, but those are 2 examples of how to do it. Again, with the clarity and communication, I don't want to belabor that because we looked at that and you've got it in your notes. Making routines comfortable. Writing stories to help anticipate new situations. There's a story about going to Mass that is in the packet that I will email to you guys that kind of helps to familiarize with the Mass. Social stories is also something you might have heard about. Social stories are very specific. They're based on a particular person's, like we had a boy, Michael, did not like the bell that his parish would ring just before Mass would begin. So one of his teachers wrote a social story for him to help him get comfortable with just by reading it, and and then when he would come in for catechesis, that was one of the things when we went into the church, he would ring the bell. So visuals about people. This is just visual. This is actually a neat way of, those are pictures of the kids in a classroom. And so you could have the child with autism sort of having the seating grid and being able to put on who is actually speaking at the time, or using this to pick who's going to answer a question for the teacher. Now that actual strategy has a couple of things. One is it engages him or her in something that he might not be able to do otherwise, be able to participate in, but it also, the kids that want to answer questions, and the kids that don't want to answer questions are going to get to the child with autism and kind of direct them. So it's nurturing some interaction too. This is my church. I told you about that. This is one way of adapting stories. This was using coloring pages. This is Jerry Gibbia had done this back in the days before we had digital technology. But and what you do is, and actually there are these stories about Jesus I'll pass around, and just that you can be looking at, because it shows using the duplicate pictures. But, and here's another way. You may not match it to a picture. You actually match the picture into the shape. But this is when it's like every Saturday Jesus went to the synagogue to pray to God and read God's stories with other people. Who went to the synagogue? Jesus went to the synagogue. And so the child with autism would be putting it in to the story. And what did Jesus do there? Jesus would pray to God and read God's stories. These are stories that I had developed based on Flom Gospel Weeklies. The thing is, right, stories are how we share everything, right? I mean, our family stories, our faith stories. And the challenge is that children's Bibles often simplify things to the point where it distorts or it's not necessarily helpful. So what I did with these is the starting point was actually the Catechist Work Guide from Flom Gospel Weeklies for kindergarten, because it was a very simple telling of the gospel that was still fairly accurate into the sense of the gospel. And then I simplified from there, or I would go to the text. But, most of the pictures are actually from Flom Gospel Weeklies. They've approved for me to distribute them, so I'm happy to email the link to you if you want to assemble them. And you can see how they're put together. I actually have them available, so you've got a set that's the story and then the set that's the interactive pieces, so you know what's duplicated. Or you could duplicate your own if you wanted to highlight different parts of the stories. It's a token. Working with training their peers. Mary Beth identified some kids at the time, originally in the second grade group, that were just leaders, and worked with them to be able to help bring Ben along, and that was really helpful. We already talked about preparing for a new environment. And in summary, care. Thinking about communication, attitude, routine, and environment is going to go a long way to it.